But I think it is imperative that we maintain the legality of abortion.
This is I Don't Speak German. I'm Jack Graham, he, him, and in this podcast I talk to my friend Daniel Harper, also he, him, who spent years tracking the far right in their safe spaces. In this show we talk about them and about the wider reactionary forces feeding them and feeding off them. Be warned, this is difficult subject matter. Content warnings always apply. Okay, and welcome to episode 93, an episode entitled, provisionally entitled, Oh Dear God, It's 2021, and apparently I still have to think about Richard Spencer. Why are you doing this to me, Daniel? Why? Couldn't I be torn to pieces by a pack of rabid hounds instead? Actually, we might simplify that for the release.
Yeah,
so Daniel, that's what this is about. It's old school IDSG, isn't it?
Very old school. We're going back. I have a link. The very first link in the show notes is to our previous episode about Richard Spencer, at least our first episode about Richard Spencer, which was, if you can recall that far back, January 2019, episode 1, our very first episode.
Our very first episode.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now 92 episodes later, having kind of bounced along the Richard Spencer from time to time and having discussed him and even played clips of him when he was being slightly more rational than his Nazi compatriots, we are now covering him again. And you might ask why. And in fact, I think everyone is asking why. And the answer being manyfold. One, a lot has happened since January 2019, and it's worth getting into some of that. Two, coming out of kind of several months of doing kind of IDW stuff, I thought it was worth kind of easing back into the Nazi content and giving the new listeners a little bit of a primer of the stuff that we used to do. And three, he well, not even he, but I've been kind of notoriously I don't want to say pissed off, but discomfited by the way Richard Spencer is still talked about in the mainstream media. And don't worry, we're going to be getting into that very shortly. And particularly some recent news articles that seem to still not understand things that they should have known in like January of 2017. So we're gonna get into that. I'm really I don't know how to quite begin, because like I could tell people to just go back and listen to episode 1. I feel like I want to kind of re-summarize kind of the basics of who Richard Spencer is here. The term alternative right, which got later shortened to alt-right, was not quite coined by Richard Spencer, but it was certainly sort of popularized by Richard Spencer. It came about by a speech by this guy named Paul Gottfried, who gave a speech in November of 2008, which, if you will recall, is several days after Barack Obama was elected president of the United States. Mm-hmm. And Gottfried gave a speech in which he kind of uses the term alternative right and kind of discusses what the right wing in the United States needs to be doing in the future based on the failures of the George W. Bush administration, and then sort of like against the neocon wing. And so the history is that the term alternative right or alt-right, it first gets used by Spencer, then it kind of comes out of favor after a couple of years. Gets picked up by this kind of manosphere online community, and then he kind of comes back to it in a big way and starts embracing some of the memes. He starts embracing Pepe. He starts embracing some of the internet subculture. But Richard Spencer himself is not of that subculture. He doesn't come from this world, right? He comes from this world of his family owned a plantation in the slaveholder era in Louisiana. They have a very nice house in Whitefish, Montana. He is
reality is sometimes distressingly on the nose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He was pursuing a PhD, I believe, at Duke University. He was friends with Stephen Miller, formerly of the Trump White House, while he was at school at Duke. They knew each other. They were friends.
Mm-hmm.
He had a multi-year career as a columnist. He was an editor at the American Conservative. He was an editor at Tacky Mag. This is a guy who comes from this sort of like, I don't want to say alternative right, but like he comes from this storied world of like public far right intellectuals who had a place at the table, although it was not in the kind of inner confines of the kind of neoconservative think tank world. He wasn't getting the big money from that. Instead, he was getting the smaller money from a guy named William Regnery, who recently died. We were going to do an episode on William Regnery. I was started to prep it, and then the excellent podcast Eat the Rich did it for me. There's a link in the show notes. So go learn all about William Regnery. He founds this kind of Regnery publishing imprint. He's a complete piece of shit. He called late in his life the hiring of Richard Spencer to run the National Policy Institute the kind of the crown of his career. He called it like one of the best things he had ever done for his kind of political scene. For the world. Like, it was his thing that he thought he had done best in his career, basically, was finding this brilliant, bright, diamond shard person, Richard Spencer. So and this guy has a long history of being a complete piece of shit, by the way. Regnery imprint, by the way, one of the things I learned recently as I was researching another episode is that Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, the horrifyingly anti-trans bigot book that, it was published by Regnery Press, which should tell you everything you need to know about the TERF Nazi continuum, ultimately.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Caceres on YouTube. Go and watch
those
videos.
Yes, definitely. I look forward to every one. I've seen them all at least twice. It's great stuff. I was listening to a Megyn Kelly episode with Abigail Schreier just before we started recording today, because like I am a glutton for fucking punishment, apparently.
Yeah. And then to make yourself feel better, you went and repeatedly slammed your hand in the desk drawer.
Right. Exactly. That's it. That's basically what my Sundays are like before we start recording. It's Abigail Schreier and then self-abuse. Those are the two, and then we start recording.
And not the fun kind.
Not the fun kind. No. So he founds the term alt-right. He kind of builds this movement around him. He's this sort of leading light, and because he's well dressed and he's the dapper young Nazi, he gets a lot of press and aligns himself with the Trump movement, really much more of in a like riding the coattails way than actually like really 100% supporting Trump. And what I think, and this is the thing that I kind of run into, is that, so there was this piece in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago as we're recording this, how a small town silenced a neo-Nazi hate campaign. There's a link to this in the show notes. This is the story of a woman named Tanya Gersh, who was a Jewish woman, wealthy Jewish woman in the town of Whitefish, Montana, where Richard Spencer and I believe parts of his family also lived there. There's a long story involving Andrew Anglin, and Christopher Cantwell was a part of that, which isn't part of the New York Times story. But essentially, the Gersh family and the Spencer family had a bit of a fight over a property dispute, and essentially Andrew Anglin tried to send a hate mob after Tanya Gersh on his Daily Stormer website. And then the town of Whitefish organized against the far right. And so this piece in the New York Times is very much kind of a profile of that, and kind of gets quotes from Spencer and kind of Spencer's involvement with it. And the like Twitterverse rediscovers Richard Spencer all that often, like the liberal Twitterverse and even sort of the left of center Twitterverse discovers Richard Spencer, and they discover things like, oh yeah, look at that loser. Remember the punch video? That's all anybody remembers about about Richard Spencer. He got punched that one time. in 2017, actually, on Inauguration Day. He got punched. That was the meme. That's the funny thing. That's all. And then once he was punched, he went away. There was no longer any Richard Spencer for anybody to worry about. That's what happened.
Punch, problem solved.
And I have here a piece kind of commenting.
Don't get me wrong, the punch is fine.
Oh no, the punch is fine. The punch is fine. I mean,
let's be any. We're not saying where I stand on this. We're
not saying Richard Spencer shouldn't have been punished that day. Believe me, we are very much pro Richard Spencer should have been punished that day. Yeah. But it's
I'm just saying it wasn't what phrase could you use? A final solution.
This is a piece by Raffi Schwartz at Discourse Blog. America's Top Nazi is a broke little booger who can't get a table. And it goes through all the kind of like the New York Times piece is kind of about kind of the Spencer can't hang out in his hometown of Whitefish, and like restaurants won't serve him, and he's broke because his lawyers fired him and because he's getting sued and all this other stuff. And I'm not trying to pick on this particular piece, but this is kind of endemic of how people discuss this issue. And so I'm just going to quote this briefly.
And in fair disclosure, I think I saw this at the time and I tweeted about how happy it made me. So maybe I'm falling into the same trap that you're about to have a go at other people.
Well, I'm not, and I don't want to be, I'm not trying to be critical of this impulse. So what I want to do is I want to explore this impulse a little bit. Okay. Yeah. So this is what we're doing. So let's just read this bit here, and then we'll unpack it slightly. The punch, which prompted plenty of hand-wringing and pearl-clutching of whether or not it's ever okay to ever punch a Nazi, it sure is, occurred during what should have been the height of Spencer's career as a full-time racist, the inauguration of Donald Trump. Instead, it forever branded him as that Nazi who got his clock thoroughly cleaned and helped define him as the bigot of the Trump era. This, I think, is crucial to the arc of Spencer's seeming cancellation by the people of Whitefish. It's much easier to identify a Nazi and identify what should be done to them when that Nazi has already become an internet joke for both being a Nazi and facing the consequences thereof. Were Spencer not memed into oblivion as the Nazi who got smacked, my guess is that it wouldn't have been quite so easy to rally an entire community to oppose him. Yes, it would likely still have happened in some form, thanks to sincerely hard work of both activists and the ordinary citizens on the ground in Whitefish and elsewhere, but I can't help but think of that the moment Spencer got blasted in his jaw, in the jaw, his cancellation or silencing or whatever doofy substitute for getting what he deserves became inevitable. Now, what are your thoughts on that? Just sorry, I'm kind of confronting you with this a little bit blind, but what are your thoughts on that? Because there's a lot I would agree with there.
Yeah, there's a lot I agree with there as well, actually. To be completely irrelevant, I once wrote a thing about how in England, kind of the official list of our bad kings all turns out to be the ones that got overthrown or usurped. And like our official list of good kings include kings like Edward III, who started the 30 Years' War, or was it it was the 100 Years' War. I beg your pardon. I did you into service there, Edward. He's one of our good ones, whereas the bad ones are the kind of weren't very efficient and got themselves overthrown by a duke or something. So yeah, I think that's probably quite acute, actually, that observation.
Well, I think that there's this, what this elides for me, and the quote, even the bit that I quoted, and I'm trying to be very fair to this, does talk about like the sincerely hard work of activists and ordinary citizens on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. But the meme, the punch, there is this kind of feeling that like, well, he got punched in the face and then he became irrelevant thereafter, when really what happened was, well, after the punch, the people in Whitefish, including like local law enforcement and like Chamber of Commerce types who like he just didn't like him because he was bad PR for them, not because he was a Nazi, because he was a too high profile Nazi, because he'd always been a Nazi.
Made them look bad.
He made them look bad, right? So the citizens had to actually do things other than just the one guy who punched Richard Spencer. And then he was still 8 months away from co-headlining and co-organizing the Unite the Right rally in August of 2017. And then he got confronted in the streets again. And at the same time, he was still getting, fairly sympathetic press, even from quote unquote liberal media all over the place. And even after that, it wasn't until he had several lawsuits filed against him and many other confrontations by incredibly brave activists who did not become part of a meme on the internet because of happenstance, who actually got him to stop doing what he was doing and kind of forced him underground.
Yeah.
He was broken by finances, effectively. He could not afford to keep going in the way that he was going. He met too much resistance.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Harder, lower profile, less glamorous, long, hard slog stuff.
Right. The punch is, I mean, I could kind of take the meme is worth something, and the meme told people who he was or galvanized people. But the punch itself, Spencer himself, and unfortunately I don't have this audio because I wasn't archiving everything back in early 2017. And in fact, this is part of why I learned to archive fucking everything. But he gets deplatformed on a regular basis from his kind of audio and video feeds. And so he says a whole lot of different stuff that's just kind of popped up over the years. He loves the sound of his own voice and spends much time talking into microphones to anyone who will listen. But a whole bunch of stuff has been deleted. But I remember listening in early 2017 to him talking about I got punched. I mean, it hurt my face for a couple of hours, but ultimately, usually they just bring silly string. And so who the fuck cares? It's kind of his opinion. Whenever he's asked about this stuff, Richard Spencer did not stop doing activism because he got punched in the face that one time. Just not he doesn't care about that. And you say to me,
it's it has to be a long campaign of punches everywhere he goes, every time, punches of, metaphorical as well as literal ones.
Right. It's not just physically punching people in the face. It's very much, it's a whole campaign. It's a doxing campaign. It's ideological warfare. It's, physical confrontation. It's putting one of the things that people will do is just kind of make it inconvenient for him to talk, blowing kazoos whenever he's trying to give an interview, cymbals and just noisemakers and stuff it's amazing how effective just that kind of stuff is. Outmanning whenever he brings 30 people along, bring 3,000 people to counter protest. That stuff is much, much more effective than debating him in rational logic, certainly, or a single incredibly meme-worthy punch. However much we might appreciate the punch is not actually the thing.
It's a brick in the wall. Yeah.
Right. Now you may be asking me, Daniel, maybe he was just lying on that podcast. Richard Spencer. He is someone who is he's deeply ironic. He does not say what he means. He endorsed Biden, for Christ's sake. Look, I got this piece from Tablet Magazine here. I'm going to quote very slightly. No, white supremacist Richard Spencer didn't seriously endorse Joe Biden. This person from Tablet Mag puts in his article, quoting from this. And yet, countless credulous accounts, many on the pro-Trump right, but also some on the anti-Biden left, uncritically shared Spencer's posting as though it was on the level. That a disingenuous racist like Spencer would pretend to support Biden in order to get attention and undercut the former vice president is not surprising. What is surprising is how many people still fall for Spencer's transparent trolling. In reality, Spencer and the other white supremacists have a long history of purposely adopting their opponents' causes and pretending to back them in order to undermine them. That's exactly what Spencer did in 2018 by pretending to support Zionism when he actually has a long history of hate towards both Israel and the Jews and claims that the Jewish state and its supporters control America. Now, there's a lot to unpack there as well. I would like to just note, and we can discuss this if you like, but just note that supporting quote unquote Zionism of some form and believing that the Jews and the Jewish state are controlling America are actually not mutually inconsistent positions.
No, not necessarily. No.
And I'm not saying I'm not supporting either one of those things, but we're
just saying they're not the same thing.
It's not the same thing. They're not mutually opposed, right? So. But this piety that Richard Spencer, of course, is just trolling by pretending to support Biden. He's just one of those weird alt-right weirdos. He has nothing to do with politics. He doesn't say anything that he actually believes. He is not like us and our normal, people that we can have conversations with who are within the mainstream of political discourse. The people like Richard Spencer, they just lie all the time. And I know that because he said something that I kind of agree with. He said something that I kind of agree with, and therefore he has to just be trolling. If he supports Biden, what am I supposed to do? Support Trump? I'm not trying to oversimplify this like particular article, right? Although I think the article is very bad. I think that you should not be able to write pieces about Richard Spencer if that's your take on Richard Spencer, because it means that you don't know anything about Richard Spencer. Guess what I know something about Richard Spencer. So let's walk through some clips. And what I want to get across here is that Richard Spencer just says what he believes. He tells jokes. He uses an ironic tone from time to time. But we're going to walk through from 2007 to like last week. And I want to paint a picture of Richard Spencer as someone who is not lying. He is not trolling. When he says things that he actually believes in. And he is, in some ways, thoroughly ensconced in a far-right kind of ideological tradition. Like that's how he sees himself, and that's how he is. And if we are going to reject Spencer and the people surrounding Richard Spencer, we not only have to reject these sort of like the trashy far-right Pepe types and the Daily Show and the people who use the N-word a bunch, but the entire ideological edifice that surrounds them. This is the earliest thing I can find of him speaking on YouTube. This is from 2007. He was a speaker. He was introducing Ron Paul, who was at the time running for president.
Yes, I've come across this one in my own researches.
At the Robert Taft Club. Now, there's a long history here about the Robert Taft Club. Believe me, I don't have the like complete Richard Spencer timeline in front of me and every position he ever held and that sort of thing. I was putting notes together and decided if there is some like professional podcast production company that wants to do like a 6-episode miniseries about the history of Richard Spencer, I would be happy to write and present that for you. You just have to, pay me because that's work. That's significant work. But
he's trying to get away from me, folks. I'm not gonna let him.
This is from October of 2007, and this is the bulk of his introduction, and this is. Again, I want to be clear. I want you to listen to this, and I want you to listen to all the other clips. And there is a progression in terms of who he's speaking to. But ultimately, the Spencer that you see in 2007 is the same Spencer that you see in 2021. And he is not trolling, right? So let's just start here. This is his introduction to Ron Paul.
A year away from the presidential election, conservatives stand at a crossroads, especially when it comes to the issue of foreign policy. This is certainly not always the case. For 60 years, conservatives of a variety of stripes, traditionalists, libertarians, Wall Street conservatives, neocons, were able to look over some differences. This is 60, yeah. For 60 years this happened. Okay. They were able to look over some very obvious differences and able to rally around opposition to the Soviet Union. Indeed, I think one could say that the post-war conservative movement would be impossible without that foreign policy consensus. The end of the Cold War brought a host of new opportunities, but it also brought about some serious, very difficult questions that in many ways the conservative movement has been unwilling or perhaps incapable of answering. Such as, should the U.S. sustain the fighting force abroad, or should we withdraw and kind of bring the troops home and invest a peace dividend at home? Should we actually make considerations for the spread of democracy abroad, or spread of human rights abroad, or something like this, or to take part in humanitarian interventions? Also, what could be the role of international bodies that arose during the Cold War, such as the UN or NATO? Should these have a role to play afterward? Again, the conservative movement never answered these questions. Sometimes they would support interventions, sometimes not. Sometimes they would favor democratization, sometimes not. Certainly after 9/11, President George W. Bush has forcefully reinvented the foreign policy of the Republican Party, and by extension much of the conservative movement, to be one of active interventionary attacks. And to this he's married a visionary faith that America represents a universal system that we can export abroad. In the President's words, we are led by events and common sense to one conclusion: the survival of liberty in our land increasingly depends on the success of liberty in other lands. The best hope for peace in our world is the expansion of freedom in the whole world. or Baghdad is going to be a democracy by next Tuesday. While such sentiments might be appealing, the reality of the U.S. occupation has led a substantial majority of Americans to disapprove of the president's conduct of foreign policy and to seriously question democratization as a foreign policy rationale. In this way, conservatives have an opportunity to chart a new course. If we're going to really rethink everything, then there's no one better to turn to than Representative Ron Paul of Texas.
Lots of things to pull out of that. First, that's literally a clip from C-SPAN. It's pretty boring, and I played it at length in part to demonstrate that. But he also,
Richard Spencer on C-SPAN.
This isn't a man breathing fire. This isn't a man, screaming ethnic slurs. He's
thoroughly respectable young conservative.
He is, let's see, 2007. He would have been, 30s, mid 30s at this point. Early 30s, maybe. He is, you notice that there's the crowd is definitely aware of some of the kind of like internal dynamics and some of the unstated jokes there. There's a chuckle when he refers to, certain, kind of ideological differences among the wings of the Republican Party. And it's not hard to imagine. I mean, there were like liberals in 2007 or so. Or at least in sort of the like 2005, 2006, there was a strand of, mainstream, kind of progressive liberalism who looked at Ron Paul and kind of saw him as this kind of like, we can kind of get on board with this. This is kind of prior to, kind of Obama coming on the scene and kind of charming everybody's pants off. But, there was this sense of, we hate the war. Even a, kind of a libertarian or a Republican type who is against the war, you can almost imagine these as like the never Bush Democrats, right? Or the never Bush Republicans, right? That's the kind of frame that we kind of see from that. And it's built on this, they're not, it's kind of in flowery language, but it is this kind of non-interventionist. We don't believe in this, bringing democracy to the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is not a liberal, this is not something you would have seen from like a liberal politician, a Democratic politician in 2007, but it's something that a lot of people could kind of have gotten along with. This is not 100 miles away from stuff that was being said at that time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember like around about this time, Jon Stewart was kind of puffing Ron Paul. It was kind of in a, the conservative media won't talk about him, won't talk about his candidacy for president, etc. But it was, he got a respectful hearing.
No, definitely, and I believe Ron Paul actually showed up on the Daily Show at some point. Man,
I'm sure he did. Yeah.
This is boring policy agenda type stuff, right? This is about a year prior to the kind of founding of the alt-right. This is before he gets into explicitly kind of white nationalist politics, but he was, working at the American Conservative at this point. He was, writing essays, writing papers, he was editing pieces. And the issue was that, down the line, he was kind of that harder edge. He was just slightly too white nationalist for the paleo conservatives. He was slightly on that kind of like edgy side. In fact, in the, I believe in that piece, he thanks VDARE as being one of the funding organizations for the Robert Taft Club, which I didn't want to play the entire thing, but like there's a lot of that going on. So these groups exist in order to kind of launder the reputations of these people. And that's who Richard Spencer was in 2007. It's just completely bog standard, boring, vaguely white nationalist, but like very respectable person you would sit and have a glass of mediocre bourbon with if you were so inclined.
Sure. The point being that there's a hell of a lot of these people, thoroughly respectable, mainstream to all, external appearances, people in the Republican Party. And, you scratch the top layer off and you've got white nationalists underneath. Right. I mean, not even really the top layer anymore.
Yeah. And the explicit thing once, and this is something where I call Donald Trump a catalyst for this kind of white nationalist movement as opposed to a cause of it, because it already existed. It was already there. Yeah. It was in the it was in the halls of power, just in this kind of very hidden, kind of cultivated way, and not being given kind of the full reins of power, as opposed to sort of the more neocon, stride the world with a big dick and, a big army kind of strategy towards politics. The decline of the Republican Party in the last couple of years of the Bush administration, in some ways created a power vacuum for people like this to kind of start to get a little bit more attention, to get a little bit more time for themselves. The Tea Party happens, the alt-right happens, Manosphere, Gamergate, yada, yada, yada. We could do whole episodes about all of these things, and we have done about some of these things.
I was going to say we have, yeah.
We have, yeah. Go back in the archives. But the next thing the next clip I have anyway, is from 2016. And this is from the NPI, that's the National Policy Institute, of which Richard Spencer was I forget what exactly his title was, but he was the head, he was running it, he was the CEO or whatever, of the National Policy Institute. They ran a annual conference for at least several years and gave time for open white nationalists, for this kind of online a subculture, the alt-right. They were bringing some of those people and some of their ideas into some of this kind of like off-center annals of power thing. And so they were the first group, or among the first groups, to really support Trump. Although some of these guys did not support him, too openly, too early. But there was definitely a sense of Trump had their style. And this is partly through the kind of the Bannon influence, who is also kind of feeding on this kind of like online alt-right energy. I mean, there's a real mixture. There's a real kind of complex thing kind of happening in that 2014 to mid 2017 era. And this clip that I'm about to play you is from the NPI conference 2016, mere days after Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, before he had taken office. And this was the Howlgate incident. Do you remember the Hailgate or Howlgate incident?
Oh yes.
Yeah, bits of this were captured by The Atlantic, and there was a big viral video of, like, at the end of this speech, Richard Spencer calls out, "Hail Trump, hail our people, hail victory," and a whole bunch of people give the "quote unquote" Roman salute, which is the Nazi arm salute thing.
Yeah.
For people who don't know what the Roman salute is, they put together a sizzle reel of this thing, which in which Richard Spencer says the words like "Lugenpresse," and he uses he says the word "cock," and he uses a lot of the kind of the alt-right language, because in this crowd, these are mainly young white men who were very invested in this kind of online subculture. And the idea was that they were going to use the online subculture and write it into kind of the halls of power through meme magic, right?
Yeah.
And
so he's opportunistically using a certain kind of language.
Right. He's using a certain kind of language, and he continued to do so, not just in this kind of place, but in various other fora. He went on the Daily Show and used the language and said all the same things. It was part of the language that they were just using at that time. This is
That's where the action was at that moment.
But the movement, the white nationalist movement, and what Richard Spencer's project is much larger than just an online subculture. And I think that's something that, because he comes to the public consciousness in this way, I think that's where some of this sense of like, oh, he's just a troll because he's using the Pepe meme, or because he was wearing a Pepe pin when he got punched in the face. In fact, he was being asked by the reporter what the Pepe pen meant at that time.
I was going to say, at the moment he was punched, he was talking about how it was a great symbol.
Right. And that's all it ever was a symbol. It was a way to rally people around it. The other thing that I wanted to highlight in that original clip that will play through the rest of this is that Richard Spencer is also he has an idealist conception of politics, by which I mean, he believes that, that he's a very much a great man of history kind of guy. And he believes that the ideas of great men, the actions of great men who have great ideas that can inspire a republic, and kind of like that's how history is driven. And he does not view history through a kind of materialistic lens. He doesn't view history through a realist kind of like angle of like what's actually going on, what actually causes like the war in Afghanistan. We have a clip about the end of the war in Afghanistan coming up, but this is why I use that example. But it's always through this, through this kind of will to power kind of language, through this language of, we have to have, a vision of our future, and we have to establish that vision. And that's the way that like white people are going to, sustain through this kind of dark time in our history in which we are not not masters of our destiny, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll come back to that. But this is again Richard Spencer from that same speech, from that speech at the MPI conference. This is the more quiet thing that he was saying. And I want to again kind of highlight how much this is.
So this is from earlier in the speech.
This is before he says, hail Trump, hail victory, hail our people.
Right.
Like what gets played is kind of the beginning where he's kind of like introing and kind of doing the jokes about Pepe and Lugan Presa and all that sort of thing. And then the end where people are throwing Roman salutes. This is the message that he's ultimately trying to send. And this is the message that gives people the desire to throw the Roman salute, because this is the real thing that they want. And Trump is seen as a vessel towards that end, right?
So this is kind of the matter of the spit. I mean, to the extent that it,
right.
that it has any matter. The a lot of people won't have heard. They'll have heard the controversial, showy bit at the end, but not this bit.
And again, this is on the longer side of a clip I would normally play, but I think it's important to give this context. If we're going to do Richard Spencer again, this is what I want people to take away from it, right?
Yeah.
This is what he's actually saying.
Yeah.
I mean, he does say a lot of bigoted shit as well, and we'll get into that here shortly. But this is the side. This is the thing that makes people, that sort of brought people to his side. Maybe is kind of what I'm trying to get at here.
We need to remind ourselves of these things. None of this is natural. None of this is normal. This is sick, disgusting. This is a sick, disgusting society run by the corrupt, defended by hysterics, drunk on self-hatred and degeneracy. We invade the world and fanatically invite entire populations who despise us. We subsidize people and institutions who make our lives worse just by the sheer fact of their existence. We run up deficits and pretend the laws of history simply don't apply to us because of American exceptionalism. This cannot go on any longer, and it won't. At some level, we demand the impossible. Even those half-joking memes about Donald Trump as God Emperor or as the progenitor of some glorious imperium testify to that yearning for something more. Yes, we should insist on our dreams, on the conquest of space, on the development of revolutionary technology, for a humanity that is greater than we are today, for a race that travels forever on an upward path. But on another level, what we want is something normal, something almost prosaic, maybe even boring. Why is something as simple as starting a family, owning a home, and leaving a legacy to your children seen as an almost impossible dream for so many Americans? Why must there be two incomes for a family to simply break even? Why is it impossible to build a real civic society because the whim of a federal bureaucrat or a social justice warrior can impose Section 8 housing, refugee resettlement, or some other population transfer scheme deliberately designed to break apart functional white communities?
I think I really kind of come back to, just listening to that again, is Tucker Carlson sounds like that every night these days.
Yeah. Yeah, that's literally what I was about to say. You can hear that every night on the Tucker Carlson show now.
Right. He would Tucker is he's a little bit punchier in his delivery, and he will shy away from the more overt, like he probably would not say white communities there at the end. He would say, middle class communities or your community. He would just say your community.
Yeah. So he knows who he's talking to.
He would cut out the, kind of the harder edges, some of the more overt language. And there is some more overt language throughout the rest of the speech. Don't get me wrong, through Spencer's speech. But again, when we say that Tucker Carlson is playing by the alt-right playbook, he's, like that's exactly what he's doing. Now, the thing is that the white nationalists have moved beyond the alt-right, but you could play bits of Tucker Carlson any night and listen to, and that's what this is, right?
Yeah, the point being that what Richard Spencer was saying at the dawn of the Trump presidency is now mainstream. He has, amongst others, successfully injected that into the mainstream.
Right. In part because he got a lot of overly credulous press coverage in the 2016, 2017 era, right? For sure. Sorry, it's just I just listened to that again. It drives me. It's sorry.
It's hard to know what to do with childish drivel like that. But
right.
I feel you.
But again, there are no jokes here. I mean, he references, God Emperor Trump as a meme. He references the glorious Imperium kind of stuff, and he's like, look,
but in
these
quite
are
a
jokes.
detached way.
Right. These are jokes that we tell online. These are memes that we put forward in order to push our actual political agenda. Our actual political agenda is we need to have a higher purpose for white people, and what we want is both kind of a soaring civilization that's going to the stars and ordinary family. We want the ability to have our families and have our kind of prosaic comfortable lives. We want our little house in the suburbs with a white picket fence, and we want space travel and internet, and we're using the presidency.
White people should be able to live in the mythical 1950s forever.
Right. Like the future 1950s, that kind of Robert Heinlein-verse, but without the group sex and without all the fun stuff, right.
Well, as I say, not the real 1950s, the mythological 1950s. The 1950s that is deconstructed in David Lynch movies. That completely blank and on the square.
Right.
All white people should be able to live in that world. And the fact that they can't, it's all the fault of elites and people of color and people in 3 parentheses. Yeah, we know what you're saying.
Well, and why is it impossible? Sorry, I put the link to the full text of that speech. If you just want to read the speech, you can also do that. So I do have it right here, but he does have the line, why is it impossible to build a real civic society? Because the whim of a federal bureaucrat, and you can see the 3 parentheses there, or a social justice warrior, look at the 3 parentheses there, can impose Section 8 housing, black people coming into your community, refugee resettlement, brown people coming into your community, or some other population transfer scheme deliberately designed to break apart functional white communities. This is great replacement shit. But he's not saying it as great replacement. Everybody knows what he's saying. Everybody agrees with what he's saying, but he's not even there. He's not quite saying it. But again, not a joke. There are no jokes here. There's nothing. This isn't some bit that he's putting on. Listen to what he's saying, and he's saying what he actually believes.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's actually, not to give the man any credit, but it's actually quite well calibrated to span that gap between the actual fascist ideology, which forms the basis of what loads of people in the basis of the Republican Party, to be blunt about it, loads of people in that party actually believe, which comes down to stuff when you actually state it outright, it comes down to the white genocide conspiracy theory and shit like that, biological racism, to span the gap between that as a sort of overt statement and just the normal functioning of the Republican Party and the conservative movement as a mainstream movement. He's consciously calibrating it so that he's kind of bridging that gap. He's couching the overt Nazi shit, which is secretly and always has been secretly at the base of it, in something that's a little bit further towards honesty than the normal mainstream rhetoric. And in the process is making the Nazism both more overt and kind of trying to make it sound more respectable.
Right. Well, and the whole, I mean, this is something that, we've said before on many episodes, and doesn't necessarily apply so much to Richard Spencer, although I think it does, but it's less overt when it comes to Spencer, because Spencer doesn't really believe in people's opinions mattering. In Spencer's world, there are elites, and he is one of them. And then there are peons, and
we've played that clip on this show about him, people should look up and see a face like his looking down at them.
We're going to play it again here in a minute. So
I thought we might.
No. So when I tell you that Richard Spencer is not joking, that when he says something, 99% of the time you can take him at his word, I mean that literally. So we're going to fast forward through a little bit of history here. You run through Spencer's kind of his peak as a political figure. He gets on a bunch of news programs. He gets interviewed. He does a ton of magazine puff pieces. Late 2016, early 2017, up through August 2017 are this kind of increasing series of victories for Richard Spencer and the alt-right. They go out and terrorize communities. They give marches and speeches almost every week. There are beatings in the street of leftists, Antifa, people of color, trans people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not all of which is directly connected to Spencer, of course, but Spencer is the founder of this movement. He is the undisputed leader at this point of white nationalism in America. Until August 12th, 2017, in which, because there was enough prior notice and people actually were able to get organized, and because the media covered it so extensively, go back and listen to episode 3 about the Unite the Right rally and episode 4 about the aftermath of the Unite the Right rally. If you are so inclined, we've already done 2, I think, very good episodes on this topic. So I don't want to have to revisit the whole thing, but
very proud of those early episodes. So.
He is riding the wave of victory until he is confronted in a very real way, in a very public way on the streets by on August 11th, 2017 and on August 12th, 2017, who it is those on the ground activists, much more so than the guy who punched Richard Spencer on Donald Trump's inauguration day, who are, if you're going to count somebody confronting Spencer in the street, those are the people that really, that's the turning point, because then the violent intentions of what white nationalism is, it's not quote unquote peaceful ethnic cleansing, it's ethnic cleansing, which there's no difference between the two, but like suddenly it's kind of mask off. And not only on that day, but he continues to try to do a college tour up through like middle of 2018, in which I believe the final kind of straw was in Lansing. He is confronted kind of for the last time. He can no longer afford the insurance premiums for the security that he's going to need in order to continue to do the rallies, because he has been bankrupted both by his continuing college tour and by the fact that, like, after Unite the Right, the movement itself was torn apart because so many people got doxxed that day. And, there's this siloing effect in which, like, Richard Spencer lost all his friends. Nobody wanted to hang out with him anymore. But he also got sued by a number of people, including he is now subject to the Science v. Kessler lawsuit, which will finally, COVID delayed it by over a year at this point, but will finally go into courts next month, which I think is the reinvigoration of the interest in Richard Spencer, and why some of this like kind of old shit kind of got dredged up again, because there are articles, and I put a couple in the show notes about like Richard Spencer is broke now. Like, man, who knew that happened? And it's like, everybody who was following Richard Spencer for the last 2 years knows. He lost his lawyer. He is completely broke. He is defending himself pro se. He is MPI just had a $2.6 million judgment against it. Like, that organization, that they'll never be able to pay that money in that civil lawsuit. And it's all related to the violence of the Unite the Right rally. Like that's the thing. And that's the issue. So this is the other kind of big gif maybe that people know about Richard Spencer, is the Richard Spencer Antifa is winning clip. And this is the one I want. This is about a minute long, and I just want you to listen to the context of this with what I've said, the knowledge that Richard Spencer is not lying. Like, Richard Spencer he is not trying to spin this. He doesn't play the spin game in this way. Richard Spencer was speaking on a live stream on a YouTube video, which has now been deleted. And this is before I was archiving video, so I don't have it. But somebody grabbed it, and this clip is still up there. This is Richard Spencer speaking to his fans, to his remaining fans, about why he's having to cancel his college tour.
I really hate to say this, and I definitely hesitate to say this, but Antifa is winning to the extent that they are willing to go further than anyone else, in the sense that they will do things in terms of just violence, intimidation, general nastiness. They are willing to do things that no one else is willing to do.
There is not another political grouping that just in contemporary America or Western and Central Europe that chants about violently attacking people, me or anyone else they deem a Nazi, which is 95% of the population, I think, just engage in just heinous behavior to do things that scare people away.
That man is too clearly terrified of being in a rational debate. That's the what he really feared was getting on a live stream and somebody really owning him one day. No.
Yeah.
And just again to put this into context, Richard Spencer's whole political program is built on an explicit ethnic cleansing of the North American continent. It's built on an explicit desire for racialized violence, if not by individuals, by the state. And then he claims that the people opposing him, who are willing to oppose that with fists or with noisemakers and silly putty or whatever, like those people are the ones who are just vicious and cruel to him, because how dare he have to answer to the rabble? He's clearly better than the rest of us, right? He's clearly superior. Should I just move into the clip now? Should I just move in to the clip?
Yeah, go ahead. I don't think it requires any further comment.
This was a later leaked clip. Milo Yiannopoulos leaked this, and I would love to listen to the full clip. However long this rant lasted, this could last for 3 hours. I would listen to every glorious second of it, because this is great. So there is some explicit language here. Jack is going to cut some of that out, I think. So
I'm going to put some bleeps over it, as I did with some of the stuff in the Tom Metzger episode.
We're coming back here like a fucking 100 times. I am so mad. I am so fucking mad at these people. They don't do this to fucking me. We're gonna fucking ritualistically humiliate them. Yes, right. I am coming back here every fucking weekend if I have to. Like, this is never over. No. I win, they fucking lose. That's how the world fucking works. Little fucking cunts. They get ruled by people like me. Little fucking raccoons. My ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit. We're gonna win. I rule the fucking world. Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me. They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them. That's how the fucking world works. We are gonna destroy this fucking town.
Nope.
And just to note that the Antifa is winning clip is several months after the I'm gonna come back here every fucking weekend if I have to. You should be staring up at me with the mud on my shoe, licking the mud off my shoe, etc. You got your shit kicked out of you, Richard Spencer, and your big Duke education and your sense of moral and ethnic superiority was no match for anarcho kitties in streetwear who were willing to push back even slightly. Yeah.
Delicious.
So we have now reached the point at which in early 2019, basically, when we recorded that first episode. If you recall,
we've caught up with ourselves. We've
done the full loop now. So if you recall, in early 2019, where we left him was he had joined a new YouTube streaming thing, because they couldn't stay on YouTube at this point because YouTube would ban their channels and get them deleted. And Richard Spencer was too famous to really kind of be able to kind of stay on those platforms for very long. And so they, instead of recording videos and uploading them, they would do live streams and then just kind of share the channel and then delete it from the YouTube channel, so they couldn't get the channel banned, and then people would just know to tune in at certain times so they could watch their favorite white nationalist content. He was on a channel called Heel Turn. And Heel Turn, there's a long sordid history here, but Hillturn ends up being the birthplace of Terrorgram and the Vanguard streaming guys and Goy Talk. Not necessarily Bowl Patrol, but like that group, all those people ended up being part of that kind of initial investment. Richard Spencer splits from those people very early, and he has continued to sort of bounce around doing various vague podcast-like things on the internet, and then eventually maybe uploading them to one of his many RSS feeds, which I track about 6 RSS feeds right now, which are occasionally updated with Richard Spencer's full history of content. So, where he will just like re-upload like stuff from like as far back as 2012, some of this stuff where it's, you know, like whatever he still has, I guess he just kind of re-uploads every now and then. So he hangs out. He was doing DLive for a while. He was doing and he's always kind of hanging out with an ever, kind of decreasing in popularity cast of people. I wish I had I wish I had pulled out the there was a clip a little while ago on the Daily Show in which they referenced we will recover some of the Daily Show guys coming up in a few episodes, but one of the guys referenced like, oh, back in those days when Richard Spencer was saying all those cucky things like we have to respect Israel's right to exist and all that sort of thing, and how he didn't really like that but felt the necessity to kind of go along with the project because Richard Spencer was, there was a sense of like unity and solidarity that they were trying to uphold. But many people on the far right, on the white nationalist right, never really accepted that shit when Richard Spencer said it. Although I think Richard Spencer actually believes it. He's fine with Israel existing so long as it's just as long as all the Jews live there and they don't have any control over him. Like he has no interest in Jewish people in general. But so you get this kind of continual process, this kind of grinding down of Richard Spencer through the series of lawsuits. There is a ton of kind of back and forth of, he lost his lawyer, then he got his lawyer again, and he's represented by this other guy. And the one thing that was really kind of happening in early 2019 was he was hanging out with this guy, JF Gary Epi. And I keep planning to do an episode on JF Gary Epi. One of these days we're going to get onto it.
One day, yeah.
If you saw my Twitter on my Twitter, which I've actually locked for now because I just am taking a break from Twitter and it's just easy to lock it and just not look at it. Is
the word Brett coming towards
the word Brett is coming? JF Gary Epi did a full live stream critiquing, quote unquote, Brett and Heather's new book. He has defended Brett from the attacks of David Foster of the Rebel Wisdom podcast on numerous occasions. He is not an unalloyed fan of Brett, but he definitely knows who he is, and it would astonish me if these two don't eventually make some kind of contact at some point, because fans of Brett and Heather are asking them to respond to JF Gary Epi's book, The Revolutionary Phenotype, right?
Yeah, I'm quite sure Gary Epi will be on the Dark Horse podcast one day.
Well, and the thing that JF Gary Epi did, and something that was very bright of him, is that he used to be a much more explicit white nationalist, in the sense that it's not that he's not an explicit white nationalist now, but Richard Spencer was on his show like 8 or 10 times that are even just like, if you just search the titles, you can find a whole bunch of them that Richard Spencer was just like the named guest. He was hanging out with like really overt white nationalists for a long time and talking about the Jewish question. There is no question that JF Gary Epi is a white nationalist. He appeared on the Daily Show. This is who this guy is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He is also,
amongst
and this is
other things.
He is also, I don't have the facts in front of me, so I'm going to tread lightly here.
Yeah.
He is very strongly alleged in the sense that there are court filings to this effect to have essentially groomed a young woman with mental disabilities into being a sexual partner of his, to the degree that her parents filed papers against him being able to have access to her. And there are like judges' orders to that effect and that sort of thing. Now, this gets into complicated phenomena because, ultimately, I don't think anybody's ever asked the young woman how she felt about all of this. And I think there is, like parent conservatorship of their adult children, particularly if they have disabilities. It gets into like really, really complicated, because we just don't know all the facts there. Right.
No.
But this is, this is something that I believe is very likely to be true. And whether I think there's some gray area in terms of like getting the legal system involved, et cetera, et cetera. JF Gary Epi is a fucking creep. All right. Let's just like leave it at that.
Yeah.
And how do I know JF Gary Epi is a creep? How do I know? Because now he deleted his old The Public Space YouTube channel and BitChute archive and all the other, like very little of that still exists on the internet somewhere. It would be a shame if someone did manage to start archiving the something like 800 episodes of The Public Space from 2 different channels. If someone were to put that much work in, they might still have access to episode 196, where Richard Spencer comes on and defends himself from the allegations that he was beating his wife. Oh my goodness.
Oh, look at that.
Because in his divorce filings that were going on during this entire period where he was losing to Antifa, he was also getting divorced from his wife. Now, his first wife is absolutely a piece of shit. She was fully invested in the white nationalist political project. She helped, she is a Russian national. She helped do translations of like Dugin's work and some other stuff of that nature.
Alexander Dugin, yeah.
They worked together for 10 years. Like this is, there's no question, Spencer's ex-wife was a piece of shit.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean domestic violence is okay, right?
No, that's right.
We are allowed to believe both of those things. I want to be clear about this.
Yes.
She is a victim despite also being a horrifying human being. I think it's worthwhile to note. Now, I could play a whole bunch of this episode 196. It is slow. It's boring. But this is Richard Spencer talking again to his friend, JF Gary Epi, who is also super creepy thing about women, probably an abusive, this is him talking about the troubles that he's had in early 2019, just after we recorded our original episode, involving lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. And let's just listen to a little bit of this. Why don't we?
It was clear at the very least to me in 2017 that the marriage could not go on. I was dealing with all sorts of things throughout 2017, including the civil lawsuit that has, come out of the Charlottesville affair. I've just been dealing with the deplatforming issue, which has been absolutely crippling. And the whole thing was just dragging out. I also had a very difficult time finding representation in Whitefish. This is something, again, I don't think I've talked about this on any other show, but basically lawyers have an ethical obligation to take on cases, even cases that might be controversial. They don't have to take on every case, of course, no one's saying that. But they do have a professional obligation to at least give someone a fair shot. It was very difficult to find representation within Whitefish itself, just because of the controversy and so on. There seemed to be a kind of whisper campaign going on, perhaps. I don't know. But the fact is, I do have 2 lawyers that I'm very confident in, and I appreciate it. They are not doing this for political motivations at all. I don't really want lawyers who are politically motivated, to be honest.
Spoiler alert, he lost both of those lawyers eventually because he could no longer pay them.
Yeah.
Which we already kind of explored earlier on. So we're a little bit out of order here, but this is Spencer.
Maybe if they'd been a bit more politically motivated,
or, maybe I was going to play some of JF Gary Epi's speech there, but I was listening to it without being able to see his face. He has a very strong Quebecois accent, which I found almost impossible to understand. So we're going to eventually have to play a bunch of JF Gary Epi for his own episode, and I apologize in advance because he is He is a very I find it, he has a very, very thick accent, and he says
Yeah, yeah.
very, very horrifying things. Again,
We apologize in advance for the slime that will leak from your earbuds
Right.
just from Gary Eppie being on the episode.
And so again, our mainstream journalists who are now astonished that that Richard Spencer is out of money and can't get a lawyer and is having problems in his hometown. He was talking about this very openly in public to thousands of people in early 2019 in response to the allegations that he was assaulting his wife. We may play an extended bit of that episode when we do the JF Gary Eppie episode, because JF Gary Eppie has a very considered approach as to how to approach that content, and that he does not allow Spencer to actually defend himself. Instead, JF will defend Spencer for Spencer and then not ask Spencer to respond. So it's like,
Right.
oh, well, sometimes sometimes a man needs to be a man and stand up for himself. And, women, we know that they can say whatever they want to in a legal filing. And certainly I'm not asking Richard Spencer, you, Richard, to say anything like this or to respond in any way, but we certainly know that these things happen. And so now I think we could just kind of move on with another topic. Like that's the tone of the thing. I'm paraphrasing, but that's definitely what he was saying at the time. So
that's amazing. So it's not even, Richard Spencer, come on and defend yourself. It's Richard Spencer, come on and listen to me defend you for you.
Right. And of course, there was surely no pre-negotiation ahead of time in terms of what got discussed and what didn't in the moment. Again, listen to how reasonable, how not joking around he is, being completely honest with the things that he actually believes. So fast forward, I don't have a whole lot more here because there's just not a whole lot more to say. He's circling the drain at this point. He does a whole bunch of little shows. He does, again, his D-Life thing. He does, he's still got a YouTube channel. He's still got a BitChute now, Odyssey. He's now moved on to Odyssey, just like our friends Brett and Heather. Everybody, they all moved from best people. They all moved from BitChute to Odyssey. Is sort of like the migration pattern, because BitChute actually started enforcing community guidelines and actually started removing far-right content. At least the worst of the worst, the stuff that they actually consider kind of promoting violence, they actually started deleting that stuff. And so now you can't have that. We got to move on to greener pastures, the next place where we can store our vile content. Odyssey. Those are the people Brett and Heather are relying on for their video hosting these days. Although they are now posting back on YouTube. They just forgot that they weren't allowed to be on YouTube and didn't want to, support them anymore because people wouldn't want to go to Odyssey. Anyway, not trying to talk about Brett and Heather here. But instead he's hanging out. He's kind of got two friends these days. I haven't seen him on JF's show in a while. I haven't really looked that deeply into JF's new show, but he basically hangs out with these two guys, Keith Woods, who probably not worth a full episode. He is a very young guy. He is, I don't even want to get into Keith Woods. He's a little fucking dipshit. He's a traditionalist. Like, I think he's a tradcath kind of like he's a groiper. He's a groiper who attached onto Richard Spencer instead of Nick Fuentes. Like that's the whole thing. Okay. And we could do a whole episode about the Nick Fuentes Richard Spencer feud because that's hilarious. But aside from the content here, they have hated each other since late 2017. The two men despise each other with a fucking passion. It is amazing.
I think I've made this joke before, but what do you know? I agree with both Richard Spencer and Nick Fuentes about something.
So instead, what I want to do is I want to play you. This is if you were going to tune into Richard Spencer right now, and let me be straight with this. Richard Spencer lost his blue check on Twitter, but he's still on Twitter with his original account. He has 72,000 followers. He does he hangs out in the Twitter Spaces, which is the new thing where you just where it's like Clubhouse, but it's a Twitter space. So people can just tune in. I tuned in one day just to see what Richard Spencer sounded like live. I listen to Richard Spencer at 2x speed most of the time. I apologize for playing him at 1x here. He is interminable at 1x speed. There are a few people who love the sound of their own voice more than Richard Spencer does. So I thought because the other guy that Richard Spencer is hanging out with, and this guy's probably worth an episode at one point, is this guy Edward Dutton. And Edward Dutton is he currently lives in Finland, but he is from the UK. He is the former editor-in-chief of Mankind Quarterly, which is a racist pseudoscience journal. Mm-hmm. He is currently on the board of Mankind Quarterly. He has some academic credentials. He is an academic. He writes books, and no one loves to smell of their own farts more than Edward Dutton does. And so I'm going to play you a little bit of first Spencer Dutton talking about Afghanistan and all these women who were at think tanks who believed in the war in Afghanistan and some of the effects of that. And this is mostly just to get a flavor of what it is to just kind of tune in to a random Richard Spencer thing, because this is from 2 weeks ago or something. This is from very recently. So let's just play a little bit of this. And the other thing here is I try not to knock on audio quality when it comes to independently made podcasts in particular, because Lord knows we've had our ups and downs, and not every episode sounds great, and there is a talent to this. Lesson one, if you're going to try to do these things, is get into a room that has some kind of padding in it and not too much of an echo, and wear headphones so that your microphone doesn't pick up what you're hearing from the other side, so you don't get a feedback loop. Richard Spencer is quite good at this. Edward Dutton, not so much. For someone who cares so much about IQ and the superiority of certain people with certain genes, maybe you could learn the basics of how to talk to an audience. Some episodes are worse than others. This one is very bad. So enjoy. Feast for the ears here.
Just damage to human life of Americans. It's much higher than that. I think I actually heard an estimate that it's $500 billion or even $1 trillion of kind of liabilities that they're going to have to pay for in terms of injured Americans. And not pensions.
And then you've got that fascinating woman, Jennifer Caparelli, saying, please don't on Twitter, saying, please, she works for the Institute of War Studies or something in DC. And she said, please don't share tweets with Saigon-like images in case it causes us to get post-traumatic stress.
Oh, I think I tweeted that out, yeah.
The men that fought there got their legs blown off. Not their post-traumatic stress, but the post-traumatic stress of seeing an image that isn't very nice.
Right. For a think tank, a chick with a master's degree working at a think tank who wants to believe that we can build democracy in Afghanistan. We don't want to trigger this.
We can build a better world. We can build a better world, and it's all just about democracy and kindness. And it's so awful that Kabul's not going to be having a Pride March this year. And please don't.
Well, they might be having a Pride March, just of a different.
Yeah, different kind of pride.
Different kind of
pride in religion and blood. Right. And please don't do that, because it won't help us if we have PST. It might cause us to self-harm. I thought that was absolutely wonderful. It was just such an embodiment of the reason why the Taliban have won, because they don't have values like that, and they don't have anybody in their society or tolerate anybody in their society that has views like that. And so.
Well, also, I mean, when we think about government systems, you have to take into account things like terrain. You certainly have to take into account things like climate. You have to take into account things like race, obviously, and not to mention history. But I think, again, those girls with master's degrees, they don't take anything of those things in account. They have a kind of platonic ideal of democracy, which basically, yes, means gays and parades and women getting undergraduate degrees and, working in academia or becoming like themselves. Maybe a female's becoming think tank.
Starts off with the same kind of, anti-war, anti-interventionist, the neocons were wrong, in which case he's now the 20 years of the Afghan war, which started under George W. Bush, starts with that same basic rhetoric. Hey, you know what? On some level, the war in Afghanistan was terrible. It was awful. I agree. the pro-Taliban stance that they then venture into, because all these feminists, all these like blue-haired women at the think tanks, which ultimately lost this war because we can't fight a big manly war, which is the subtext here, right? We can't fight a real war because, you know, there are all these women involved and they believe in things like democracy instead of power and, you know, empire over peoples and, you know, making the world into under your will. Like that's essentially what's being argued here, in case that wasn't kind of clear from the context, right?
Yeah. Listening to those two dreary, venomous pricks talk, it's kind of perfect because, yes, war in Afghanistan, invasion of Afghanistan, occupation of Afghanistan, bad. Imperialism, neoconservatism, etc., bad. Yes, true. And yeah, plenty of scope to criticize, like neoliberal and neoconservative think tanks and commentators and people like that. Yeah, absolutely. But the problem isn't that, you know, our culture is too feminine and feminized and degenerate and too tolerant of gays and people like that. You know, we America invades these countries because it has this messianic female idea of spreading peace and love and democracy, or, you know, that is so it's such drivelly, childish, immaterial bollocks. It's kind of perfect. It's a perfect illustration of where these people start with something that could become a genuine and valid critique and just fly off into fashy what the fuck land.
And again, he's still caught up in this like idealist vision of this, right? Yeah. It's still like the criticism is that we went out and tried to like create democracy. The thing is, like, the war in Afghanistan went exactly like the framers of the war in Afghanistan wanted it to. The blob does the things the blob does because it needs to do so in order to maintain the military industrial complex. Like American foreign policy is built on profiteering. It's built on, you know, all the, you know, the fact that like, oh, and then the Taliban came back in and like, what did we do all that for? We did all that for burning a bunch of stuff in Bagram so that you could give Halliburton money. Like that's what the Afghan war was about.
Yeah, the war on terror materially was about projecting American imperial power, American hegemony, and you get right down to it. It's about control of resources, primarily but not exclusively fossil fuels, which is about strengthening American capitalism. That's the actual material basis of this. The irony is that when he does this sort of nonsense, he's actually buying into the exact kind of delusion that is prevalent on like the mainstream liberal media spectrum, where they talk about, well, you know, the problem with Bush is that he has this messianic belief in democracy. You know, that is childish nonsense. That is not what's going on here. But as you say, it's complete idealism. But then fascism always is. It's always complete idealism. Even when they think they're being material, when they're talking about genes and race and stuff like that, that is pure idealism projected onto biology. It's right. Always idealism all the way down.
And the like, you know, human biodiversity, you know, kind of like race realist stuff that Edward Dutton spends a lot of his time on. I know I haven't covered that yet, but he does spend a huge amount of his time talking about like Islam is ascendant now because Islam is a protective of, you know, motherhood and a protective of women. And, you know, therefore there's a greater, you know, they have lower IQs and therefore they have a higher fecundity and therefore they're producing more people. I mean, this is a little argument that he's made on a couple of occasions. You know, that like Islam is ascendant because they're having more babies, and you know, like there is no like sense of any kind of material context to any of these things, right? It's all just this kind of just so stories like level nonsense, you know. Yeah. Much like, you know, now the U.S. military is feminized, and that's why they had to, you know, pull out of the war or kind of whatever was going on in that you know pseudo babble there. But you're absolutely right to call it. It is a very childish vision of the world. It really lacks any kind of sophistication. I mean, not to give them any credit, but even the ones who are, you know, building kind of there's a giant Jewish conspiracy built on, you know, like Jewish, racial dominance to, you know, like eradicate the white race. Deeply stupid and anti-materialist, but at least there's like sort of a logic. At least there's kind of something there to push against this idea that like
there's an actual theory there.
There's an actual theory there as opposed to
it's bollocks, babble. But it's right, the material theory.
It's kind of anti-material in its own way, but you know there is at least something there. I mean, it's not complete puffery,
They have an idea about something that they think is happening in the material world, whereas this is completely phantasmic. It's just like, there's some kind of, for some reason, somehow, in some sort of completely spectral way, you get from people having ideas about feminism to the invasion of Afghanistan. It's absolutely ridiculous.
And Richard Spencer opposes the invasion of Afghanistan because we can't bring, democracy to the Middle East because those people are not equipped to take it, to accept, democracy. They're not capable of it. Horrifyingly racist idea, right? But it completely accepts the idea that the reason that we went to Afghanistan was to bring peace and democracy to the Middle East, as opposed to engage in war of empire.
Which is
Richard
bullshit
Spencer,
ideology, for God's sake, man.
Like, he agrees with the basic, he agrees with the ideas. He agrees that that's why the United States did that. Like, he agrees with the paper thin patina over that the Bush administration put over the war. He's still on that. He still believes that, despite the fact that even a lot of liberals kind of saw through that back in the day. This is the leading light of white nationalism, according to William Regnery. All right, so one more clip here. And this is the most recent clip. Now, in the cold open, we played a little clip of Richard Spencer. Pro right to choose. Look at that. Gotta be against the right to choose if you're gonna be against Richard Spencer, apparently. Because only
blown the tops off the skulls of many a liberal commentator. Richard, wow, what's going on here? I'm perplexed by this. I can't.
If any one of them, would actually listen to this drivel that he's producing these days,
exactly.
But
they
never bother. But much like he voted for Biden because he believed it. Because he believed that Joe Biden would be a more competent president and would be able to actually solve some of the problems with our society that Donald Trump was just completely incompetent to solve. And also Donald Trump was clearly not going to engage in open white nationalism. And he probably believed that Joe Biden's history of siding up to segregationists, maybe you're going to get a repeat of that. But ultimately, he said vote for Joe Biden for very comprehensible reasons if you're Richard Spencer, and largely based on just a pure competence arguments that you need to run the government and the Republicans need to just go away because they're completely out to lunch. Richard Spencer does legitimately support a woman's right to choose in this society. He absolutely supports it. He thinks it must remain legal. Let us now explore why he believes it must remain legal. And this is our last clip.
Okay, that was a good talk.
Let's just crystallize it. Abortion, right or wrong?
It's right. I have to say it. I have to be just brutally honest. I think that there are many more less evil ways of engaging in eugenics than abortion, and that should be engaged in. But I think it is imperative that we maintain the legality of abortion.
I say, imperative that we maintain the legality of abortion for woke people.
Right.
He's a funny guy, that Dutton, isn't he? Twist at the end. It's like an M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Hopefully it's a better twist than that. But no, look, the point being, Richard Spencer is not lying to you. He's saying what he believes. I hate that we spent this much time on a very simple point of view, but I felt like it needed to be demonstrated because apparently it's not getting through people's skulls anymore. I thought we went through this years ago, but apparently not. So sometimes Richard Spencer will believe in policies, will support policies that you do as well. That is because he is a terrible person who believes in terrible things, And even when he's doing the right thing, he believes in it for horrifying reasons. The logic, by the way, if I had played like the kind of earlier clip there, is the people who have abortions in the United States are overwhelmingly ethnic minorities or blue-haired feminists. And those are the people who should be aborting their babies. And whereas, kind of nice white Christian Republican women tend to have their children. So that's the logic there. And so,
yeah,
because those are the people who are getting abortions, we should allow them to have it. This is a very common point of view among the white nationalist community at this point. By the way, this is not universal. There are some who believe abortion is so horrifying that it should be made illegal, but ultimately, and also women are not equipped to make these decisions for themselves, and it should be the men in their lives who get to decide whether or not they have children. That's just universal throughout all these things. This complete disdain for the opinions and the experiences of women. No, you're out there. You should be having babies. That's all you're good for. That's the thing.
Yeah. So it turns out fascism, deeply opportunistic scavenger ideology based on profound misunderstanding of the world, not always consistent from a mainstream liberal point of view.
Oh, exactly. And again, just because when Richard Spencer says something, it's probably because he believes it, and you should stop pretending that he's some Pepe troll. And despite the fact that he's a complete loser who is about to lose very badly in this scientific cancer court case, he is going to owe millions of dollars of damages. Don't count him out entirely, because he still has something of an audience. When I tuned in on that Twitter space that one night for about 25 minutes, he had a couple hundred people listening live on his Twitter feed. Maybe he shouldn't have a Twitter feed anymore. That would be nice. That would be a thing that would be positive if we could do that.
It's a thought.
Yeah. So no big ending, no big glorious ending here. But yeah, I don't know. Do you?
I think that was pretty
there's
good.
More to say? Do you? Do I need to keep making this point over and over again? I'm sorry.
Well, look, I get it. I mean, I
yeah.
can't promise anybody else does, but I think our listeners are pretty smart people. I think they. We'll see you back here for Richard Spencer Redux 2 in another couple of years, I expect, where Daniel will attempt to convince everybody again that Richard Spencer actually does mean what he says.
What was the Apocalypse Now sequence? It was like Apocalypse Now Redux and then Final Cut, I think, was the sequence.
Yeah.
So in 2 more years we'll come back in episode like 184 or something. It will be Richard Spencer Final Cut. All right, let's get out of here. I'm done. Next episode, we are gonna delay our daily Showa coverage just a little bit, so I don't have to pick up so many fucking clips next time. We're actually going to do the grievance studies affair. We're going to go ahead and do our James Lindsay part 2 because I've got most of the notes for that one already. So we will hopefully be able to get that one out before the end of September or like very, very early October. So that's the plan for the next episode.
That was I Don't Speak German. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show or found it useful, please spread the word. If you want to contact me, I'm @_Jack_Graham_. Daniel is @Daniel E. Harper, and the show's Twitter is @IDSGpod. If you want to help us make the show and stay 100% editorially independent, we both have Patreons. I Don't Speak German is hosted at idon'tspeakgerman.libsyn.com, and we're also on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and we show up in all podcast apps. This show is associated with Eruditorum Press, where you can find more details about it. The music was by Loon the Band.
And I hate that he says abortion, but that's what he said. So
I was going to say it sounded like abortion.
Yeah, I didn't notice that until I was pulling the clips, and I'm like, man, I wish he actually did not mispronounce. I mispronounce words all the time, but
it's inconvenient for us from a
it's inconvenient. It's inconvenient.
Yeah.
But Richard Spencer, the worst thing he ever did was to mispronounce the word abortion. Anyway,